Hello, I am Xarkun and this is World of Warships Legends. Today we're going to talk about the new premium Tier 6 American battleship USS Florida. As usual, we'll take a look at my mod selection, go over my commander build briefly, examine some key features of the armor scheme, and then jump into some gameplay where we will talk about the ship's stats and how I think it is best played. I'll say right off the bat, though, that this is probably going to be a pretty challenging ship for newer players to this game, due in part to the armor scheme and the guns as well. But we'll get into that when we get into it. First up, the mod selection. In the first slot, I've selected the anti-aircraft gun mod over the secondary battery mod because I think secondaries are probably pretty useless on this ship, and also over the main battery mod because it increases the reload time, which is abysmally slow on this ship to begin with, and you don't want to increase it. Propulsion in the second slot, RGA in the third. That's the only choice available in that slot. William Sims is at the helm of this ship for me. I've got A.L. Scharnhorst and Cunningham as inspirations. If you don't have Scharnhorst, I'd probably go with JoJo or Von Essen maybe as a second inspiration. The armor scheme, 25mm bow and stern plating, which is fairly standard for all Tier 6 battleships, but the side plating, note, is 26mm. All of this green section can be overmatched, that is penetrated regardless of angle, by anything with 15 or 16-inch guns. But it does have 37mm deck armor, which is going to shatter a good deal of cruiser HE if it actually hits there. And it's also going to bounce 15 and 16-inch guns from longer ranges. So there is that. However, the Citadel is both bizarrely shaped and highly exposed. The Citadel armor belt is 285mm, which I think is rather thin for battleships of this tier. So this is quite a vulnerable ship, and you certainly don't want to be giving broadside in it. Now, for the gameplay. We're going to be on the Atlantic map, and we're going to have a capture the base mode game for this review here. We'll start off by talking about the hit points briefly. It's got 63,800 hit points at base, but with Sims, I've got that up to 65,720, and that gives it a fairly robust hit points pool for the tier. It's pretty high up there, actually. 26% torpedo damage reduction, which is actually quite decent for the tier, even though it sounds pretty low. But the main thing about this ship, and the thing that really gives it its character, is the guns. It's got 12 356mm or 14-inch guns in 3 quadruple turrets. Yes, quadruple turrets, much like the French ships. The guns have a 16.1 kilometer base range, which is pretty good for the tier, and I've got that up to 17.7 kilometers with William Sims. The first ship we're going to spot is going to be a cruiser in this game, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's going to be a Helena. You're going to see what the AP on these guns can do to cruisers. Note that the AP Alpha Strike is 9,500 at base, which is exactly the same Alpha Strike as the Lyon's 340mm guns. Although with gyrating drill bits on Sims, I've got that up to 10.4K. There's that Helena, by the way. We're going to line up the shot on this guy, or maybe not. Okay, now he's back. We've spotted him again. So this time, we are going to line up the shot, release it, and take a look at the results here. As you can see, they're pretty good. We score a Citadel and do 16,630 damage immediately. The AP on these guns is very dangerous to cruisers, and even though the gun size is pretty small, it's nothing to sneeze at in a battleship. However, it is pretty small for the tier. Most battleships at this tier have 15-inch or sometimes 16-inch guns. Only this Florida, the King George V, and I believe the Poltava have 356mm guns. So it is sometimes a little bit difficult to do damage to angled battleships. But again, let's drive that point home about cruisers. The small gun caliber, makes them highly, highly effective against cruisers. And if you didn't believe it with the Helena, well, take a look at the Ochakov, which is notorious for eating battleship shells and only being overpenned. He evidently thinks that's going to be the case here, but if he thought that, he was wrong. Now he can go back to port and rethink his life choices. 3 citadels, devastating strike, and all so that he could launch torpedoes at me. We're going to see the AP in action once more here coming up. Note the enemy, Leon, out there 12.6 kilometers away as we wait for these guns to reload. And again, the reload time is abysmally slow, 33.5 seconds, longest reload time at the tier. But when they do reload and you do release these AP volleys at ships that are vulnerable to them, like the rather lightly armored Leon, well, there's another Citadel, 12k damage on that volley there. As I was saying, though, the small caliber of the guns can make it difficult to do damage against angled battleships, particularly against more heavily armored and angled tier 7 battleships. And in those cases, you might find that you do want to switch to the HE. In fact, I think I am going to switch to the HE here after I clear the guns, because I intended to shoot once more at this Jean Bart, who, as you can see, is burning from somebody else's high explosive, and his hit points are whittling down quite nicely. Unfortunately, I think I go behind the island here, and I don't really have access to him. At this point, I think it's probably not worth it to switch the shell type and go through that terrible 33-second reload again. So we're just going to discharge the HE at this Massachusetts out here, and the results aren't going to be especially encouraging. However, the HE is very, very good. Even though the Alpha Strike is kind of low at 4,750, it pretty much rivals the Leon, and the fire chance is 22%, which is a little bit lower than the Leon's fire chance, but if you've ever played that ship, then you know that the HE is quite effective, and that is the case here. However, if you're going to be actively switching shell types, it can be a little tricky, and you really are going to have to be paying attention and plan ahead because of the terribly long reload time. The AP, though, it definitely is effective, and the HE is effective, but the armor scheme, as we talked about earlier in this video, does render this thing pretty vulnerable to tier 6 and tier 7 battleships, since, as I said, most of them tend to have 15-inch guns or 16-inch guns, and both of those can overmatch you in lots of parts of this ship. Now, in the beginning of this game, we're not going to see just how squishy this ship can truly be, but at the end of it, or in the final sequence, that is going to become pretty evident here. So this ship is probably better played at medium to longer ranges, especially in the beginning of the game. If you're closer to the enemy battleships, well, you're probably a more attractive target. And once this ship, is around for a little bit longer and people realize that it is, in fact, kind of squishy, well, then you might be in trouble if one of these tier 6 or tier 7 battleships decide to focus you down. Let's talk about the AA rating on this ship, though. It's pretty stellar with a rating of 96, and I think the AA is quite effective. It's probably going to shoot down quite a few planes, and it's probably one of the better anti-aircraft battleships at the tier. So there is that to keep in mind, especially with the introduction of the new German carrier line, which is quite scary. Although if a German carrier is going to drop you with its AP bombs in this thing, or really any other battleship, well, you don't really stand much of a chance. There's not much you can do aside from rely on those AA guns to shoot them down. The speed on this ship, though, is nice. It contrasts the Florida from the newly released American battleship line. All the ships in that line, apart from the North Carolina, which is the odd man out, are pretty slow, but this one has a base speed of 27 knots. It is reduced to 24.3 knots on my build because of the gyrating drill bits commander skill. It's got a 760 meter turning circle, which is on the lower end of the spectrum, beaten only by the Nelson and Leon. In other words, it's a rather tight turning circle relative to other battleships at the tier. And it's got a 15.4 second rudder shift time, which is on the higher end of the spectrum, and I've increased that actually to 16.1 with gyrating drill bits. Concealment, 13.7 kilometer detectability by sea and 11.5 kilometer detectability by air. Pretty typical for a battleship of this tier. So what do I think of this ship? I think it's an interesting ship. If anything, it reminds me quite a bit of the Leon, and that all has to do with the guns. These guns are a lot like that ship, although unlike that ship, you know, they have I think they have the improved American penetration angles, and they can do absolutely crazy amounts of damage to broadside battleships and cruisers, as you've seen aptly demonstrated in this game. The problem is the armor on this ship, which is fairly squishy, and that is typical of most of the American battleships. As we've already established, because of the 25 and 26 millimeter plating, it is vulnerable to larger guns, but that plating is also vulnerable to high explosive spam. Now, of course, I did say the deck armor is 37 millimeters, which is going to protect you more from bigger guns at range and theoretically from HE, cruiser HE. However, if cruiser HE is going to hit you, you'll note that the superstructure is quite large as it is on a lot of American battleships, so you're still probably going to be taking quite a bit of high explosive damage from cruisers. So again, I think this ship lends itself to being played at medium to longer ranges, and as this game is sort of winding down here, the ship count is approaching parity. We're almost tied here with the enemies. In fact, as I say that, we do become tied with the enemies. And here's an enemy Florida, by the way, which gives us a unique insight into seeing just how vulnerable and squishy this ship is when it gives broadside. You definitely want to avoid doing that. We hit that guy pretty hard there, and that Vanguard behind us, well, I thought he was going to die to my teammate there, but he did not. And as you could see there, he overmatched our stern and did a significant amount of damage. And now we've got incoming shells from the Massachusetts. He mostly misses, so we avoid taking any significant damage there, but a follow-up shot from the Jean Bart hits us for 9k. And just like that, we're well below half health after being focused by a number of battleships there of a higher tier than us and with bigger guns. It doesn't take much to reduce this ship if you are not careful. So you do have to play very cautiously in this ship, and that's why I say it might be a little bit challenging for newer players. It's not an incredible tank or anything like that. It's definitely something you need to really think about your positioning, and also something you need to practice good angling in order to mitigate the damage. You're definitely going to take penetrations through that 26 millimeter side plating, but provided you angle that Citadel armor against bigger guns, you can keep that protected. Still though, you definitely don't want to be in a position where you can't disengage. You don't want to be this close to battleships like I am here at the end of this game. Although at this point it doesn't really matter that Massachusetts and that Jean Bart is going, they're both going to go down, and we are going to win this game fairly comfortably. Although I think the Jean Bart is going to come around this corner and demonstrate exactly why you don't want to be caught in close-up situations against enemy battleships with guns that can overmatch you. Note that I've switched to the high explosive. We get a decent volley there, but as we wait for this reload to happen, this Jean Bart is going to get reloaded, and he's going to have really no problem finishing us off, if I recall correctly. There is the shot, and he knows exactly where to aim, right through the bow, and that's enough to take us out. So we end the game dead, but that Jean Bart is not going to be floating for too much longer, and we are going to emerge victorious. Final thoughts on the Florida. Well, I think it is a challenging ship for the reasons I've outlined. It's a fairly squishy ship. It's one that probably needs to be played in more of a passive kind of battleship role. So if you're not into that, you're probably not going to like this ship. I would suspect it would appeal most to American battleship aficionados because it is quite unique in the American line of battleships. It's really unlike any other American battleship tech tree or premium. So the novelty factor might be enough to convince you to buy it. It's definitely not a bad ship by any means, but it's probably not a super competitive ship either, for whatever that's worth. So keep that in mind if you choose to buy it. It costs 12,500 doubloons, and I believe that's all I have left to say on it. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.